Welcome. If you're a woman who has a sense that there's more out there for you, you're in the right place. I'm Whitney Baker, host of the Electric Ideas podcast. Somewhere along the line of work and kids, life carried on, but I lost track of my truth. I'm on a reflective journey, and that's what this podcast is all about. Each week, I interview a woman who is lighting her own path and offering others hope. Before our conversation ends, we'll share a reflective question for you to explore. Sometimes all we need is a jolt, a fresh idea, an aha moment that connects us to a sense of possibility. This, my friends, is what I call an electric idea. I'm Whitney Baker from Electric Ideas, and this is a mini jolt, a short episode where I share quick tips, tools, and reflections to light you up with a greater sense of what's possible for you and your life. I had a lot of feedback from people in the Electric Ideas community that you're interested in learning about intuition. I'm going to share what intuition means to me, as well as how you too can start more intentionally connecting with your own intuition. My belief is that our intuition, that inner knowing of what is true, our inner impulses and natural instincts are always there, but they're more available to some of us because our intuition gets obscured for many reasons, which I will tell you more about. Intuition for me is like a personal GPS that guides me and speaks my truth from the inside out. So when you practice regularly connecting with and trusting this inner guidance system, it becomes easier to make choices that support your highest good. And everybody wants to make good choices, right? So how do we do this? Well, the first thing that needs to happen in order to deepen your connection with your intuition is that you need to recognize that it might take both time and intention. Just like we can build and train our muscles at the gym, we can build and train our intuition. I think women especially know a lot more than we give ourselves credit for. But we are often programmed to second guess ourselves and look outside of ourselves for answers. In order to nurture that connection with our intuition, we have to actually slow down enough in our day-to-day and start asking ourselves questions. So for some of you, that already might feel a little weird or uneasy, but I've found that a lot of people tend to wait until they've got these really big, potentially life-altering decisions to make to turn to their intuition. And if they haven't practiced connecting to their intuition, sometimes I think it's harder to hear and listen. So instead of waiting to be in that situation, start practicing small with low-stakes questions. For example, what do I want for lunch? Believe you have an answer inside of you, and then listen when it actually comes to you. When you make a habit out of listening to these small nudges in your day-to-day and following them, you begin to slowly build that self-trust muscle. That way, when it comes time for these bigger decisions, you already have your personal guidance system tuned up and in great shape. I want to share a quick passage from Arianna Huffington's book called Thrive because it really speaks to me and encapsulates a lot of how I think about intuition. She says, even when we're not at a fork in the road, wondering what to do and trying to hear that inner voice, our intuition is always there, always reading the situation, always trying to steer us the right way. But can we hear it? Are we paying attention? Are we living a life that keeps the pathway to our intuition unblocked? I really love that passage because I know that if you are somebody who has been part of the Electric Ideas community for a long time, or even if somehow you happened to stumble across this episode of the podcast, I'm guessing you are somebody who is saying yes to wanting to know themselves better, who wants to listen to themselves more because you're craving a sense of fulfillment and a sense of expansion in your life. And you probably have a sense that the answers are inside of you and not outside of you, but you're not entirely clear how to tap into that inner guidance system. So like I said, a starting place is being more clear about asking questions, big and small, to yourself first. But as the passage I shared from Arianna Huffington asks, are you living a life that keeps the pathway to your intuition unblocked? Another question I would add to that is, do you know how to distinguish your inner wisdom from the barrage of other mental chatter that's common for lots of women. So let's talk about both of those important pieces. For me, a large part of keeping the pathway for intuition unblocked is create both physical and inner space to listen. So it's one thing to get really intentional about asking yourself questions, but I also encourage you to find a practice that can help you rise above the fretting and fray of everyday life and actually hear what your intuition is telling you. We live in a world of incessant busyness, of constant bombardment from digital devices, and it's easy to feel noisy in our minds and in our lives. But just know that choosing to always be in a state of constant inputs and noise might be canceling out your ability to hear your intuition. This is one of the many reasons I practice meditation daily. It's a great tool to help slow the external swirl and intentionally drop into your internal space. When I say create time to slow down and listen in, it doesn't mean that that's what your entire life has to look at. I think sometimes women look at these practices in a black or white way, as if they have to spend their entire lives in a Zen den in order to connect with their intuition. And that's just not true. I have plenty of noise in my life. I love blaring music in the kitchen, and I'm usually happiest when there is a huge pile of shoes in my entryway because it means friends or my kids' friends are enjoying my home. So your entire life doesn't have to feel tranquil. That would probably get a little boring if you ask me. However, if you don't routinely have some sort of activity where you are by yourself and you're able to tune out the noise of the external world, turn off the to-dos, and tune into yourself, then I highly encourage you to build that into your regular routine because you might not know what you're missing. If meditation isn't your jam, that's not a problem. There are so many ways you can tap into your intuition, and I encourage you to let it feel fun. It's really important to me when I do any episode of Electric Ideas by myself or when I have a guest on that maybe we teach you something or explore something that gives you a fresh sense of possibility, but also that there is something tangible that you can try that you don't have to think about or create for yourself. So, with that in mind, here are a couple of practices you can try out and again, have fun with in order to connect to your intuition. Number one, you can go for what I call an answer walk. I made up that name as I was dreaming up this episode. Find a time to go for a quiet walk, preferably somewhere in nature where you don't have tons of outside noise. Before you start walking, ask yourself a question you'd like an answer to. It might be something that's weighing on you, like a decision you need to make about your health or at work. But it could also be something like, what would be fun for me to do this weekend? You don't have to save your intuition for questions that feel heavy. So ask yourself the question internally and envision planting the question like a seed in your heart. Then let it go and simply go for your walk. Don't listen to a book or a podcast or music or make a call on your walk. Just walk. And don't feel the need to focus on producing an answer. Trust that you planted a question like a seed in your heart space and that you're simply creating space so that answers will bubble up when the timing is right. Here's another fun practice you can explore. Try asking yourself a question at night when you're relaxed in bed right before you turn off the light to go to sleep. You might even want to have a journal handy on your bedside table so you can write down the question on a blank sheet of paper before you go to sleep. I've heard this exercise talked about a lot as a genius habit, and I feel like it doesn't require scientific explanation to agree that things happen with our subconscious mind while we sleep. When you pose a question to yourself right before your head hits the pillow, you prime your mind to work on finding solutions while you rest. Then, when you wake up before racing to get your day started, take the journal with the question in it and ask yourself the question again with an intention of actually asking your intuition, your inner guidance, the question. Then just write down what comes up. You might be surprised at the fresh perspective or clarity of your answers. And because I promised connecting with your intuition can be fun, here's a cherry on top when it comes to keeping a journal by your bedside table. If you're someone who has dreams at night, write down some of the images or symbols that came up in your dreams, then ask your intuition what those symbols mean. Maybe just listen in or try journaling about it. And don't knock it until you try it because it might be very eye opening. So, while I want to give you some tangible and fun practices to try, I just want to point out that these are all different ways in to a very simple two-step process of connecting with your intuition. First, ask and trust that you have the answers within you. Then, secondly, create space to listen. Something else I've come to understand with intuition that can be tricky for very rational brained type thinkers to understand is that intuition can feel like a single breadcrumb. And until we follow that first breadcrumb, the next breadcrumb might not be available. So, as adults, do we need to make well thought out decisions and plans sometimes? Of course. But I found with some of my clients that they're so obsessed with needing a long term plan or a promised set of results in their lives that they stand in their own way and block their own wisdom. So instead of overthinking, especially when life is full and we have jobs and families and responsibilities, sometimes you don't need to have it all figured out. It's okay to simply honor that nudge to take the class or invite that person to lunch and trust that the next breadcrumb will reveal itself. When your intuition whispers, you get to choose to listen and follow it. And the more you take clear action based on the guidance of your intuition, the more regular and clear guidance you will receive. I hope this perspective gives you a permission slip to make some moves without always needing to have a master plan. Also, in this area for me, it just feels like living a much more playful life when I assume there are possibilities and opportunities out there knocking at my door that are cool that I can't even envision for myself. But if I follow my intuition, I follow the breadcrumbs, they will be revealed. So at this point in the conversation, I'm sure there are some of you who feel a bit energized by all of this intuition talk, or maybe you feel a little bit uncertain, and that's okay too. In case you are still feeling a little mixed energy around this whole discussion of intuition, I want to address a snag that some of you will face. Because this is often the case, it can be tricky to distinguish when it's your intuition talking versus your ego talking. I have some very strong opinions on this, so I hope me sharing them will help you in being more discerning of when that inner voice is speaking. I believe that our intuition is always kind. What it has to tell us might not always be easy to acknowledge. It might feel scary or uncomfortable. It might be asking us to do something that stretches us out of our comfort zone, but it's always loving and coming from a place of showing us what's possible for our highest expression in life. In contrast, the voice of our ego can often feel harsh or critical. Instead of nudging us in the direction of what's possible in our lives, our ego tends to present us with the reasons why not to do things or why we can't do things. I think what often happens for women is that we get these pings or strong instincts to say yes or do something bold or make a change or end something. But then the sneaky voice of the ego creeps in and tells us why we can't. We open our hearts enough to receive this inner knowing, this intuition, but then if we're not careful, out of habit, and because the ego is always trying to get us to play small because the familiar feels safe, we cut ourselves off from what our hearts know, and we get tripped up trying to make decisions from our overthinking heads. A lot of women experience a push-pull relationship, knowing they want something, recognizing that our dreams and desires are inside of us because they're meant to be realized, and trusting that our intuition is going to give us the right breadcrumbs to baby step in that direction. But then, for myriad reasons, we cut ourselves off from our heart space, from our intuition, and we move the decision making to our logical brain that loves to look at life through the lens of limitations, that loves to come up with a laundry list of reasons why it can't be you or that something can't work. There's a famous quote by Steve Jobs, and he calls intuition, quote, more powerful than intellect, unquote. We know that intuition is different from logic. It's different from analysis. I support sound decision making, and I am married to someone who regularly analyzes crazy data in order to make decisions. I fully respect this, and I believe there are times and places for that, depending on what kind of a decision you're making. But also, I hope you don't let that type of thinking eclipse your ability to listen and trust your own knowing in decisions, both big and small. So as I wrap up, I just want to quickly recap a handful of points that I really hope you take away from this episode. First, connecting with your intuition might require time, intention, and trust, as well as the willingness to create space to slow down, get quiet, and listen to what your intuition is actually trying to tell you. Next, there are so many fun ways to connect with your intuition, so let it be fun. Start with some questions that are low stakes and just invite a little bit of lightness and joy into your life so that you can build up a relationship and really trust your intuition when harder circumstances arise. The next point I want to leave you with is that what your intuition is calling you to do isn't always easy or pain-free. For example, it might be unknowing that you need to quit your job or take a break from a relationship. But when your intuition speaks, it's always coming from a place of what's in your highest good. The intuition invites you to look at life through the lens of possibility. Your ego is always trying to keep you safe. It's just doing its job, but it will speak to you through the lens of limitation. Your intuition always speaks to you from a loving place. So I hope this helps you discern between the two. Sometimes you might experience intuition like a little spark of energy in your body that says yes. It might even subtly pull your body forward. It might tell you to call somebody or approach someone in a crowded room. So just practice listening. Give yourself a chance to see how energizing it can feel when you open up to these whispers and breadcrumbs. It's a pretty fun way to live. It opens the door to a lot of synchronicities and new opportunities for your life. I always end my episodes with a reflection. So I ask you this: how can you practice tuning into your intuition while the stakes are low? I'm really feeling in the zone today. I have a bonus for you. Women are giving me feedback that they want to work with me in ways that are more flexible, or they can do things on their own time. So I wanted to let you know that I am in the process of creating an online course that will be shorter and self-guided. So it's different than my existing 6-week season to shift mastermind for moms that's more intensive and more immersive that will be back on in September. I'm building this online course. And as I'm building this online course, I'm having a lot of clarity that oftentimes women's lives are so full that it's a blessing to simply have a structure to practice and try out the things I talk about without having to think about or create them for themselves. So beyond this question, this opportunity for reflection, I also want to leave you with a bonus opportunity to practice connecting with your intuition. So what you can do is you can find a chunk of time in your calendar for the coming week, maybe anywhere in the 15 minutes to 1 hour range. Just find a chunk and commit, use the time you have, and write Electric Ideas Practice on there as a placeholder. Block out the time on your calendar. Trust me, if you just do it now, right when you're done listening to this episode, then it'll be locked and loaded and you won't have to even think about it. And then when this time comes up, protect it and simply ask yourself, what do I want to do right now? Maybe you want to get back in bed. Maybe you want to go for a walk. Maybe you want to work because you're wildly excited about something you're creating and that's what you actually want to do. But practice asking yourself this, trusting yourself, and giving yourself space to listen. It is so empowering to have pockets of time where you're not trying to do anything except ask yourself, what do I really want to do right now? Listening and then creating space for yourself to do just that. This is such an easy practice. Anybody can do it. It's a great way to practice connecting with your intuition and building self-trust. So I hope you try it. All right. That's all for today. Thank you for listening and being a part of my community. If you have any feedback from this episode or try out any of these practices, I'd really like to hear from you. You can email me at whitney@myelectricideas.com, or you can connect with me on Instagram and message me there at @WhitneyWoman. I hope you have an inspired day. I'm so glad you joined me today. If you're looking for more, feel free to connect with me on Instagram at @WhitneyWoman. And if you enjoyed the show, I invite you to support me by leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. Hope you have an inspired day.